I'll just do a little intro again. So we are here on September 18th, 2020, in the midst of COVID-19. We've just started being able to see you and Grandma again recently. And we're going to talk about the life and times of Mark Levin.
All right.
Say hi to the people, Grandpa.
Hello. I do the best I can. I was very young when I was born in Daugavpils, Latvia in 1933, July 23, 1933.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite a good kid, I understand, but I don't remember. And I had an interesting experience when I was very young. My father was arrested and put into a Latvian prison. So until the age of 1, I really didn't know him.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1936, he was released from prison with a stipulation that he has to leave the country as soon as possible.
Why don't you tell us about your dad and why he was in prison?
Well, my father was a democratic socialist and very active. He was busy in the political scene in Latvia. The town was called Daugavpils. You don't need the spelling. And he was a member of the city council. In 1922, he married my mother, who was at the time very young, 22. My father was 9 years older than she.
Wow.
And she was just finishing university in Moscow. And she went to Latvian University in Riga, and she was planning to study medicine. Unfortunately, as soon as she took her first anatomy class, she started throwing up all over the place and fainting.
Oh my.
So she transferred to law school. She became the first female Jewish lawyer in Latvia. And she had a successful practice. Her father was very, very wealthy. He owned a string of sawmills and hardware stores. And he was able to supply anything she wanted. He was considered one of the richest men in Daugavpils. And my mother lived a life of luxury. Then she married my socialist father, who was in trouble constantly with the political world. And in 1934, they arrested him and put him in jail. Oh, he was arrested and he was tried. And I have the trial transcripts at home, if I can find them.
Oh my goodness.
And my mother was his lawyer, and she lost the case, which was fortunate, because if she had won, he would have been a free man and not been expelled from Latvia. Anyway, he was expelled and came to the United States in 1936.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know him for the first 3 years of my life. He
And
was in
just
jail.
for the camera, what were the words that came out of his mouth that landed him in jail?
I don't know the exact words, but I was told he called the Prime Minister of Latvia a son of a bitch. Nothing worse than that.
Oh, nothing better than
And for that he was arrested for sedition or something along those lines. And my mother defended him and lost, and he was put in jail.
And what did he say about being in jail?
I asked him how he liked what he liked about jail. He said 3 years, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter, and I was out. He was a very practical man. My father is my idol. I try to mirror his life as best I could. His morals were unbelievable.
Mm.
He would never do anything dishonest under any circumstances. It just couldn't happen. Anyway, in 1936, he was let out of jail on the stipulation he leave. And the Workmen's Circle General Secretary, a guy named Nathan Hanyan, heard of him because he had been quite prominent in Latvia and arranged for a lecturer's visa to come to the United States. So in 1936, he left Latvia and came to America. So I didn't know my father for another year. He was in jail for 3 years, he got out for 6 months, and was gone again for 3 years. In fact, when we came to the United States and I saw him again, I used to call him Uncle Daddy. He was a stranger. They did say that when he came here, the officials at Ellis Island thought that a lecturer was an indentured servant. So they put him in jail at Ellis Island. The Workmen's Circle sent a team of lawyers to convince the immigration people that a lecturer is not an indentured servant, and they let him out, which was fine. So we went to Canada and went to the consulate in Canada, American consulate, and applied for an immigration visa for my mother, my sister, and me. And he got it, and we came to the United States in 1937.
How did you get here?
On the Aquitania. We traveled first cabin class on the Aquitania, and my mother, when we were in Paris to wait for the boat, she was denied entry on the ship because some physician decided she had leprosy.
What?
Examined her toes, and she excuse me,
Yes, you did.
and she was diagnosed with leprosy. So she went back to Paris, went to a podiatrist, and he said, "You have an ingrown toenail, you don't have leprosy." Anyway, the second time we went to the ship, it was the Aquitania, and we got on. And we came to the United States.
Yeah, can I get you a tissue?
No, I have,
You have?
I have a
Okay.
handkerchief here somewhere.
Okay.
He always has a handkerchief.
Anyway, so in 1937, we came to the United States. Now remember, my father was a lecturer, so he traveled to give lectures. So I didn't know him again. He traveled for quite a while.
What would he lecture about?
Socialism.
Sure.
He was an ardent socialist, and there was an organization called Jewish Socialist Verband, which means Jewish Socialist Organization. And he lectured all over the United States, and he traveled all the time, so I never knew him. I never saw him. But finally he became the editor of the newspaper that the organization had called Wecker, which means in Yiddish, the alarm clock. The waker, Wecker, waker. In any case, when he got that, he was able to stay home a bit, and I got to know him. I was now about 5 years old, and I was sent to school. And I was terribly school phobic because I was insecure, very insecure.
About what?
I didn't know who my parents were. My father I didn't know. I came from Latvia. They spoke Russian. I didn't know English too well. So the first several years in school were very difficult for me because I was school phobic. And I stayed that way until the 4th grade, when I had a very interesting teacher, an Irish lady named Mrs. Hannon. I'll never forget it. She said to me, "Mark, you don't seem to be living up to your potential. I want to give you an IQ test." So she sent me for a Stanford Binet IQ test. And I scored almost 150, which said, "You're not retarded."
As everyone believed as you were
No,
growing up,
they
yeah?
thought I was retarded, but I wasn't. I had language difficulty, I was school phobic, and I was very insecure at home because my father kept moving
Leaving.
around. In any case, from the 4th grade on, I thrived in school, did very well, and made friends, became an athlete really,
What sports did you play?
baseball and some football. But one time I was playing football and somebody tackled me, and someone the size of a monster fell on top of me. So they scraped me off the circle. And I decided my mother did not raise an idiot, so I gave up
Right.
tackle football.
And that's a nice Jewish boy.
Which was a very clever thing. Anyway, I did well in junior high school. I did satisfactorily at Bronx Science,
Mm-hmm.
and I got into Bronx Science because I used to be relatively bright.
How did you like Bronx Science,
I
Dad?
loved it. Bronx Science was the best experience I ever had in schools, any kind of schools,
Why? What made it so special?
because the people there treated you as an adult. They allowed you freedoms that most high schools don't allow you.
Mm.
And I did not very well, but well enough at Bronx Science. And I got into Brooklyn College, but I chose not to go to Brooklyn. I went to NYU. Didn't like NYU. I had a professor turn me off to school, and I transferred to City College where I did very well. My sister was determined to make me a doctor, but I didn't want to be a doctor. And I met Helene in my second year of college. I was 19 years old, and so was she at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we liked each other right away. So I met her when we left camp. This was at Camp Eden. And interesting, the Workman's Circle had a lot to do with my life, the fact that I was alive. And the Workman's Circle enabled her to go to Camp Eden as a music teacher, or pianist. And so we met.
Mm-hmm.
So if not for the Workman's Circle, we never would have met.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't be alive today, probably. I'd still be in Latvia, well, under the ground, but in Latvia. And
In a nutshell.
that's in a nutshell. That's the whole quick scan.
Yeah. What
What?
was can I ask you more specific questions
Sure.
on certain things? So what was your childhood like in the US? What was your relationship with Dottie like as a kid?
My relationship with
mother?
Dottie was that she thought she was my second mother for
Mhm.
a long time. And I had to disabuse her of that. And once we did, we became very, very, very close.
Yeah.
I don't think Dottie and I could have been any closer as we got older. When I was in the Army, we used to visit her, Helene and I, and that was our second home. And Dottie and Fred were part of our lives most of our life. When we first came to the United States, we lived on 240 Audubon Avenue on the 5th floor, and they lived on the 3rd floor.
Oh my gosh.
And I met Lillian there. I don't know if you remember Lillian.
I know the name.
It's Fred's sister.
You
Uncle
know.
Fred's sister.
She's Fred's sister. She
Mhm.
was Fred's sister. And we became instant friends. And Dottie and Fred kind of became friends, but not boyfriend, girlfriend. And years later, Dottie used to arrange dates for Fred, and Fred arranged dates for Dottie. One summer, my parents were in California, and Dottie woke me up at 2 in the morning and said, Fred asked me to marry him. So I said, I approve, and went to sleep.
Oh, that's so funny.
But Dottie and I were really at odds when we were very young, because she was 6 years older than I,
Sure.
and she was convinced that what I told her to do, I had to do. And I didn't like that, so I fought with her. I once broke her pinky, I think, and she said, "You've ruined my piano career." She never had any talent anyway. So.
That's great.
Well, tell us more about your mom, Dad.
My mom was an interesting lady. She was frustrated most of her life because she couldn't practice law, and she wanted to. She was a housewife, very sad. She was a very sad woman. She adored my father, treated him like some sort of king, which translated to my sister treating Fred like a king.
Sure.
And I think she raised me incorrectly in that she didn't sympathize with my insecurity. Because remember, I didn't know my father,
Right.
and every summer she would send me to summer camp.
Sure.
And I was dreadfully homesick because
Yeah.
of my insecurity and what have you. And I wanted to go home all the time. Anyway, they kept sending me to camp every summer to the extent that I suddenly didn't want summer to come too soon because I didn't want to be sent away to camp. And it was a very, very traumatic. But I'm able to think about it, and I'm able to analyze myself and recognize that, you know, I outgrew it. How's that?
Sounds good to me.
Mhm.
Well, I'm a basically healthy person in terms of my mental position, but I think I did a lot of it myself.
Yeah.
I never went to therapy
Wow.
until recently. I
Really?
recently went to therapy because I found myself bored
Sure.
and sad.
Yeah.
And so the guy prescribed some Prozac for me. I took 6 months of Prozac and I was all better.
Huh. No longer bored, no longer sad.
I'm no longer bored. I love where we live.
Yeah.
We've met some wonderful people. And I was convinced by one of them that I'm neither a sociopath nor a psychopath. So that made me very happy. And he's a psychologist.
So you better trust him.
So I did all right.
Will you speak a little bit about your travels around the world? We talked at dinner a couple weeks ago about when you happened to find yourself in all of these places and found connections to people through.
Yeah, well, we very early in our adult life, we had enough money to take a vacation. We wanted to go on a cruise, and Annette chided us terribly. Annette Weiner, who became a very, very, very close friend, as you know. She said, "No, you're young. Go see the world." So all we could afford was Mexico. Went to Mexico, had a magnificent time. And your grandmother loved travel so much that she never wanted to talk about anything but traveling to another country. So we've seen a great deal of the world. We've been to Russia, been to Poland, been to Africa, Kenya in particular, been to Israel, been to Japan twice, China, Vietnam, Cambodia.
Wow.
And we've seen all those places. And we've seen all of the United States. And the most exciting thing we saw was Bryce Canyon. We took you there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a trip I'll never forget. The 5 of us were packed into a car, and we were traveling. Oh, was Seth with us?
Yeah.
Seth was there
19.
too, yeah.
Me?
I thought so.
1978, I believe.
And we saw all these wonderful places. And at the end of the trip, we still liked each other, which was very
There
good.
you go.
That is good.
And we had an adventure on that. There was a way to go from Bryce Canyon to the Grand Canyon. It was a long trip like that.
Sure.
But I found on the map a dirt road and went from here to here. It was only 20 miles. And it cut out over 100 miles of travel. So I said, let's take the dirt road. We had a 1979 Ford. And we fit in, and we went driving on this dirt road, which I swear to God, we didn't have a cell phone, we didn't have GPS, we just drove. And nothing, all we saw were animal skulls and a couple of, nothing, just dirt. I said, oh my God, where are we going? And we had no GPS, obviously. And I started to worry. But then we saw a car coming the other way. So I said, oh, at least it's a civilized area.
Sure.
And then we drove further, And then ahead of us, we saw a camper parked on the side of the road. And as we got closer, there was a woman sitting in the middle of the road. And when we got real close, she was urinating in the middle of the road. And we went like this, she went like that, and we kept going. And about 5 miles further, or less, we came to the main highway. And then we went to Grand Canyon.
That's great.
It's too funny.
What about the time where you were, I think you were in the army and you ended up in France?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it's true. When I was in the army, I was a real go-getter. And I found a convention in Liège, Belgium. So I went to my supervisor about the subject on which I was working. And I said, can I go? He said, of course, just get the army to give you leave to go. So I went to the sergeant and I said, I need to go to this convention in Liège. And I've got to take Jack Cahill and John Hudak with me. All right, you're raping the army. But it's all right. Go ahead, go. So we went and we flew to Paris because that was where MAX, Military Air Transport System, landed. So we got off in Paris, expecting to take the train to Liège.
Sure.
We got to Paris, we stayed in the Hotel de Paris, it's called. And we came in, and the guy went to the room and slept because the plane ride was on a DC-6 backwards. In the army, the MAX, you flew backwards.
Oh my God.
I thought we were gonna die. Anyway, we slept. Finally, the phone rings at about 9 o'clock in the morning and says, you can't stay in bed here, you gotta go see Paris. So we went downstairs and the concierge was there. And I tried to speak to him in French, my high school French. He laughed at me. I said, do you speak English? I said in French. He said, no. I said, what do you speak? He speaks Russian. Oh, I said, I speak Russian. I speak Russian. And we spoke Russian. My two buddies were very impressed. And he told us how to see Paris. First go here, take the metro here, and then walk this way. You'll see as much as Paris as you can. Then go there and walk this way, and then go there and walk this. We saw Paris the way tourists don't see it.
Wow. And any recommendations from that trip?
It was so long ago, honey.
Who can say? Who can say? And then what about, keep going.
He told us how to go see the a show, and he sent us it was a strip show.
Of course.
And he said, don't pay, get standing seat. And after the first act, you'll find plenty of places to sit. So we paid almost nothing. And it was a funny skit. Two nudists got married and went to bed. That was the skit.
Okay.
And we
Very
had
funny.
it was very funny. I mean, the nudists, they're there and they're naked, they get dressed and go to bed. And we spent so little money there because he said, don't go to that restaurant, go to that restaurant.
How old were you, Dad? Would you say?
I was 24.
So you're already married to
Yeah,
Mom.
we were married. And Mom was in her 8th month of pregnancy.
Oh my
This
God.
was July of 58.
Sure.
And David was born the 5th of August,
Yeah. Wow.
1958. So she said, this is your opportunity to go.
Hey, Dad. What did your parents, when you brought Mom home, what did they think
The
about
first
Mom?
time?
Yeah.
They thought we were too young because I just felt really very much for your grandma and your mother.
Yeah.
How could you
It
not?
was it was almost instantaneous.
Wow.
And when we came home that summer, I dated her for the first date. And Dottie asked me what I wanted for my birthday. So I said, oh, tickets to a show would be good. So she got me tickets to something called Point of No Return with Fonda.
Henry Fonda?
Henry Fonda was in it. But before that, I took your mother to a restaurant. She thought, good grief, you're rich. So I took her to the restaurant. I had the tickets for the show, and we went home, and we had a lovely evening.
Oh.
And she thought I was very rich.
Of course.
And she told me that date was her birthday, the date we dated. So I didn't send her a card, but the next week I bought her a gift. An ankle bracelet, because I was very, very much in love.
Oh.
A gold bracelet.
Oh my goodness.
It had my name on it and her name on it.
Wow, Dad.
That was a second date. We had dated at camp for.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
And
That's
anyway, we got to going alone, just the two of us,
Mm-hmm.
for 3 years before we got married.
Wow.
We were married in 55, met in 52.
There you go. Well,
Dad,
this-
I'm sorry.
I would just love to hear you speak about Cousin Isser.
Cousin Isser was an interesting gentleman. We were living in Queens at the time, and my father called and said, your first cousin, Isser, is coming to visit us. We'd like you to come and meet him.
Had you heard of him before this?
No. And when Isser came, we arrived. We were there before him. And apparently the Jewish consulate in New York called my father and said, your nephew is coming and wants to visit you. Father said, of course. So anyway, he showed up and we talked. Isser, what do you do? I'm a businessman. Oh, and why are you here? To the United States? Oh, I'm on my way to South America on business.
Business.
So my father said, okay, and we talked about old times and how my father was responsible for his unable to leave Latvia to get to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And he signed the papers because his father wouldn't.
Because Isser's father wouldn't.
His
Oh,
father.
wow.
So my father signed the papers. And he got his visa, went to Israel, joined the Haganah down there, and became very prominent, became a general in the Haganah. In any case, after a couple of hours, the phone rang. It's the consulate. The car is waiting for you downstairs. So Issa went down, we went down with them, we got into the car, and they drove off. My father said, he's a spy. How do you know, Pop? He's a spy. Believe me, he's a spy. What gives you the clue? How many tourists do you get that the consulate calls you that he's coming to see you? What does he do? He's a businessman going to South America. And 2 days later, we read about Eichmann. And he said Isser had something to do with it. And Isser was the boss of the group that went down. He was the boss of the whole Mossad. He founded the Mossad for Ben Gurion.
Oh,
Amazing.
God.
I mean, in Israel, everyone knows who
Everyone
Isser
knows
Harel
Isser
is.
Harel. When we went to Israel years later with the Wieners, people came up to him, you're Isser Harel, aren't you? Yes.
But he really was, well, the person
He
who
was notorious.
captured Adolf Eichmann.
He was a very short guy, shorter than I am. And, but he was brilliant. And he was also quite aggressive.
Yeah. Gotta be.
He was ruthless. I mean, I think that
He
was,
was ruthless.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy who organized the group that captured all the people responsible for the Olympic slaughter. The
What was that?
Olympics
it's a whole nother
years
story.
ago in Germany,
1968 or
was
72,
it?
72, excuse me,
76.
72.
In 76, the Palestinians kidnapped the Jewish team at the Olympics, brought them to an airplane and had them assassinated.
Oh my God.
But every one of the participants was subsequently assassinated by the Mossad, and Israel was responsible for that.
Wow.
Yeah,
Every
so they
one.
murdered the athletes, the Israeli athletes,
Right.
and then Israel.
They got
And there's
what
there's
was
been
kind
there's
of-
been like a movie. There have been movies about this, like
Yep,
the operation.
the story about
Eichmann.
Eichmann is in a book called The House on Garibaldi Street. If you read it, you'll see the whole story.
And there's also was that the one?
There's
that was
just a
made into
movie, yeah, within the last 2 years.
Did you see
Right.
that movie?
That movie was several years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a more recent one, like 2-3 years ago.
Oh, really?
That
Yes.
is there's in.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah.
In any event, oh yeah, this.
I forget what it's called. It was pretty good.
There's another
Yeah.
book called, if you want to read about this, or Spies in the Promised Land.
All about.
It's written about Isser.
Wow.
Tells you his life story and everything.
Wow.
It's a quick reading book, and it's very interesting.
And it's our family.
He beat up an English Navy officer who tried to intimidate him, and he beat him up.
Pop, pop.
Wow.
How are you doing? Do you need some water? You want to take
No,
5?
I'm
You
fine.
good? Yeah.
You
Amazing.
got me stimulated.
Good. I'm glad. I feel like there's just so many little stories.
Oh, Dad, tell us just a little bit about your career, your first job.
Oh, of course.
My career is really pedestrian. I was working as a technical service engineer for a company called Sonneborn, where I worked as a assistant manager of the customer service department. And I was troubleshooting, went to various locations to help people with problems that they had with the product.
Sure.
And our product was a very simple product called mineral oil. All different kinds of mineral oil. And they're used for various things that you wouldn't believe in, but mineral oil is not just for cleaning babies' bottoms, it's also for making certain products. In any case, I worked there for about 10 years, and I was offered a job by the man who really hired me for Sonneborn, a guy named Ira Kukin. And I was there for a month, and I realized that I was being ruled by a man who had no moral compass. He stole, he cheated,
Oh my God.
and he sold a product which was useless, and he asked me to sign documents saying that it was defective. And I had a big problem with it, and I went into a deep depression. And I mean it wasn't free floating, this was the reason for it. And I was so depressed that when I went to work, and I come home, I'd go to take a nap. And then Grandma would wake me up to feed for dinner, and right after dinner I'd go to sleep again.
Oh.
I was terribly depressed, and I didn't take any medication for it. But one day I went to work, and I went to a convention of the American ASLE, American Society of Lubrication Engineers. And I met a fellow there named Erwin Landau. And Landau knew me from my Sonneborn days, and he said, "You still working at Sonneborn?" I said, "No, I work for Ira Kukin." He said, "Really? How do you like it?" I said, "Erwin, I hate it." I hate it. His name was Erwin, but everyone called him Irv. I hate it. He said, "How would you like to come to work for me in a heartbeat?"
Oh.
He said, "I'll get back to you. Let me have your phone number at home." I waited a month, and I was getting deeper and deeper into depression. I thought he forgot about me.
Sure.
And one evening I got a phone call.
Oh.
"You still interested in working with me?" "Absolutely." "Well, come in, people want to meet you." So I went, and they hired me,
Yeah.
and they paid me more than I asked for.
Mm.
And I went to work with Shell, with Erwin Landau. And I was very, very happy there until I realized that Irv was crazy. And everyone knew it except me.
Oh no.
I was so grateful to Irv. I felt he was. Well, one day he had a nervous breakdown. And he went home. And I knew he would because he was such a peculiar character.
Yeah.
And I worked, in fact, his job. And when he came back, I told him to retire.
Mm.
And he said, that I became his mentor. He said, Mark, do you think I can afford it? Absolutely, Herb. He said, there's a place in Los Angeles, outside of not Los Angeles, the other one, further south.
San Diego? San Diego?
San Diego, thank you. And he bought a house there. And he was very, very happy.
Mm.
And my depression just disappeared completely. And I was working for a guy named Nick Colas. Nick Colas was one of the nicest people I'd ever known. I made a bet with him once. This was when Nixon was in trouble. And he said, Nixon will be out of office before Labor Day. I said, I bet you a lunch that he'll be out of office, but not before Labor Day. Well, that son of a gun quit before Labor Day. And I bet Nick Colas a lunch. I had no idea of his reputation. He could eat 10 people out of it. I said, I didn't realize I was giving you 20 to 1 odds. He ate his dinner. I finished it for him. Then he ordered another and another. He had 3 lunches that I couldn't have eaten by myself. One. I couldn't have eaten one of them. So, I paid the bill and I was very grateful. Then one day he retired and the vice president of marketing said, Levin, I don't think there's a real job here for you. I think you ought to go into sales. Me? Sales? All I could think of was Willie Loman. And I said, I don't want it. She said, then I can't keep you on it anymore. You either take it or get
Or leave
another
it,
job.
yeah.
I said, I'll take it.
Of course.
And I realized that was my real.
Mm.
I became a very, very, very good salesman. I sold customers we never had before. Florida Power and Light, Florida Power Corporation, Virginia Electric, Potomac Electric. They were all my customers. And Potomac Electric was particularly interesting because they had turned us down. They were going to go with Exxon.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, all right, I'll go visit them, see what the problem is. So I went down to visit them with my manager, a guy named Al Sykes. No, Alex Giametti. Alex and I went down, and I said, well, looks like it's going to be a very short meeting. Can we just chat for a while? Well, we chatted for 3 hours, went to dinner, lunch rather, and after lunch they said, we're going to give you the business. Now, Sykes commented, what a salesman. That was my crowning achievement. And I stayed with them for quite a while.
Yeah.
Until Alex retired and Sykes retired. And I went to work for a lady named, I'll think of it later.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was a bitch on wheels. Really, she was a terrible person.
Oh,
She
God.
died recently, and she was quite young. She died at 65.
Wow.
And I couldn't get her. One time I went to visit Boston Electric, which was one of my favorite customers. And the man I dealt with all the time was called to a meeting and couldn't attend, so I met with his associate, a woman, a very lovely woman. And I came back and wrote my report. And she said, you went all the way to Boston and didn't meet with your... I said, he was called to a meeting. I couldn't help it.
Sure.
Couldn't you cancel it? I didn't find out till I got there. What do you want me to do? She was on my case all the time. And a week later, she went down to Virginia with another salesperson, and they couldn't find the location. I should have gotten after her, but I didn't. I was very kind.
You were a good man.
They couldn't find it.
Mhm.
They came right back.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, shortly thereafter, Royal Dutch Shell bought Shell Oil. Shell Oil was a subsidiary of Royal Dutch Shell.
Mm-hmm.
and they could have nothing to do with Shell Oil. It was completely independent. So they offered me a transfer to Houston. And I said, no, I don't want to go to Houston. Alex Giametti had left already,
Sure.
and he was working for, quick, I can't, Castle
Castle.
Coal
That's
and
what I was
Oil.
thinking.
Castle Coal and Oil was a retailer and sold to customers. And Alex hired me to work with him
Aw.
as the manager of utility sales. I wasn't very happy with Alex because Alex is a bully and he needs a fall guy.
Sure.
I became his fall guy and I didn't like it. And I hated it. But they hired someone over Alex called Mark Stugart. And Mark Stugart,
That name I feel like
I
you
may
told
have
me
heard
about.
mentioned
Yeah.
it. He was one of the nicest people I've ever
Aw.
known. And he liked me and hated Alex. So after a little while, he fired Alex and made me vice president.
There you go.
And I was very happy there for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, Castle Oil wasn't doing too well. Well, I'll tell you what happened. Castle Oil was a very conservative company. And
Sure.
Mark Stugart was a very aggressive petroleum man. He made millions for Castle. But he also gave the owner of Castle, a guy named Mike Romita, a nervous breakdown. And one day, Helene and I were at in the Tetons, the Grand Tetons, and
Saddam Hussein?
Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And price of oil, we figured would go shooting sky high.
Sure.
And we were long oil. We were short oil, which meant that if we had to pick up the shortage, we owed people oil. So it could be. So I called up Mark
Disastrous.
Stugart from the Tetons and I said, Mark, do I have a job? Should I get a tent here at the Tetons or can I come? He said, come home, it's all right. So I came home and Mark Stugart was very wise and he covered his short position at a profit, which was impossible because the price after the invasion went tumbling.
Sure.
So we covered our short position, but Mike Romita had a nervous breakdown. So shortly thereafter, he fired Mike. And a guy named Bob Moore was hired. And he was an idiot.
I'm sensing a pattern of you working with a lot of.
He was an idiot.
Yeah.
And I called Helene to say hello, and he said, who are you talking to?
Yeah.
I said, my wife, you want to say hello? And finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't work with them much longer. When
Sure.
one day they called me, and I was planning to retire in June. They called me with an offer I couldn't refuse. They fired me with a nice package,
Oh,
and I said, okay,
I'll take it.
I'll take it.
And that's the illustrious
And
career.
that was my
Yeah.
career. And I was 62 when I retired,
Not bad.
and I wasn't quite 62. I waited 6 months during which time I got unemployment insurance.
Oh my God, that's what I'm making right now.
Because they fired me. I mean, after all, I got unemployment insurance. And I had my separation papers.
Mhm.
And I had a provident fund,
Sure.
which I invested into the stock market. And when I left Shell, they gave me a huge package. And all those packages are doing very, very
Very
well.
well.
That's why we have money.
That's
There you
great.
go.
And I retired. And Grandma and I visited the world.
Mhm.
The Cambodians invited us to go to Vietnam with them. And we said, sure.
Sure. Why not?
They took a doctor with us.
That's great.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, we should probably.
Wind
I think
down?
this is great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Amazing.
Thank you, Thank you, Dad.
Thank you so
Grandpa,
much.
this is really awesome.
amazing. We'll have to
Um,
do another session with the two of them where we talk about their
Yes.
friends and
Yes.
all that, but for another time.
Okay.
Mostly.
Yeah. been
What
here a
time is
while.
it?
It's 5 after 5.
Oh my
Oh,
god,
wow.
people are coming over soon.
It's almost time to eat.
That's right, Dad. Thank you. This
Thanks
was
so
amazing.
much, Grandpa. This is great. Part 1, done.